The air over Fort Sheridan was thick enough to drink. Heat waves danced off the blacktop of the main access road, turning the distant supply depot into a shimmering mirage. It was the kind of oppressive August afternoon that bleached the color from the sky and baked the stillness into the world. Even the cicadas seemed to be buzzing in slow motion, their drone a tired, metallic hum that clung to the humid air. Elara Vance sat in the passenger seat of the government-issue sedan. She did not seem to notice the heat. Her hands rested loosely in her lap, her posture was relaxed but perfectly aligned, a subtle geometry of composure amidst the oppressive warmth. Her face was a study in unremarkable features. She was 48, and the years had left faint lines around her eyes and mouth, maps of a life lived, but they revealed no specific destination. Her hair, a simple brown with threads of gray, was pulled back in a neat, functional bun. Her clothes were civilian. A plain navy blue polo shirt, tan khaki trousers, and sturdy, comfortable shoes. Nothing about her drew the eye. She was designed to be overlooked. The driver, a young private first class named Miller, was the opposite. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy. A film of sweat glistened on his forehead, and his knuckles were white where he gripped the steering wheel. The air conditioning in the sedan was fighting a losing battle, and a single bead of sweat traced a path down his temple, disappearing into the collar of his uniform. "Almost there, ma'am," he said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet car. He cleared his throat. "Just this internal checkpoint for the logistics depot." Elara's gaze remained fixed on the road ahead. She offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Her stillness seemed to amplify the boy's anxiety. He was fresh from advanced individual training, his uniform still crisp, his movements still tentative, as if he were afraid of breaking a rule he did not yet know existed. He had been assigned to drive her from the administrative building to a specialized communications workshop located deep within the depot. A simple task. A milk run. Yet he treated it with the gravity of a combat mission. The checkpoint came into view. A simple striped barrier arm, a small guard shack painted in faded olive drab, and 3 soldiers in military police brassards. They were leaning against the shack, trying to find a sliver of shade. They looked bored. Boredom on a military post was a volatile substance. PFC Miller slowed the sedan to a crawl, stopping perfectly at the painted white line. He looked like a student driver taking his final exam. One of the MPs pushed himself off the wall and ambled toward the car. He was young, no older than 22, with a swagger that had been practiced in a barracks mirror. A corporal's chevrons were pinned to his collar, a small taste of authority that he wore like a crown. His name tape read Davis. He sauntered to the driver's side window, his movements deliberately slow. He tapped the glass with a thick finger. Miller, flustered, fumbled with the window controls, sending it down with a jerky whir. "Afternoon," Corporal Davis said, the word dripping with condescending languor. He leaned down, resting his forearm on the roof of the car, invading their space. His eyes scanned the interior, flicking past Miller to settle on Elara. He smirked. "ID," he commanded, not looking at Miller, who was already holding his common access card out with a trembling hand. Davis ignored the private. His gaze remained on Elara. "And yours, ma'am." The word ma'am was an insult, coated in a thin veneer of procedural correctness. His expression sized her up and dismissed her in the same instant. A middle-aged civilian. A bureaucrat. A nobody. Elara did not react. Her movements were fluid and economical as she retrieved her wallet from her sensible handbag. She extracted her own identification card, a civilian equivalent for long-term contractors, and held it out. Davis finally took Miller's card, barely glancing at it before snatching Elara's from her fingers. He held it up, turning it over, his thumb smudging the laminate. "Elara Vance," he read aloud, drawing the name out. "Logistics consultant," he chuckled, a short, sharp sound of derision. He looked at his 2 buddies by the shack, who had straightened up, sensing a bit of sport. They grinned back. "Consultant," Davis repeated, as if the word tasted funny. "That's what they call it these days." Elara said nothing. Her eyes, calm and gray as a winter sea, watched him. They did not blink. They simply observed. "What kind of logistics do you consult on, Elara?" he pressed, leaning further into the window. His breath smelled of stale coffee and chewing gum. PFC Miller swallowed hard. Sir, we have an appointment at the comms workshop. We're on a schedule. Davis's head snapped toward the young private. His smile vanished. Did I ask you, Private? No, Corporal, Miller stammered, his face flushing a deep red. Then close your mouth before a fly buzzes in, Davis sneered. He turned his attention back to Alara's ID, tapping it against his teeth. This picture is generous. His two friends by the shack snickered. The sound was sharp and ugly in the heavy air. Alara's expression remained unchanged. She had offered him no anger. No fear. No reaction at all. This lack of response seemed to infuriate him more than any protest could have. He needed a reaction. He needed to feel the weight of his authority. You know, we have new security protocols, Davis said, his voice taking on a tone of mock seriousness. Random vehicle inspections. Pop the trunk. Miller looked at Alara, his eyes wide with panic. This was not standard procedure for this checkpoint. He knew it. Corporal, with all due respect, this is a non-essential personnel vehicle. We don't have. Did you just question a direct order, Private? Davis cut him off, his voice dropping to a low growl. He was no longer playing. The game had shifted. From the corner of her eye, Alara saw a dark blue sedan pull into the line behind them, waiting patiently. She saw the driver, an older man with a crisp, high-and-tight haircut, watching the exchange in his rearview mirror. Alara spoke for the first time. Her voice was low and even, devoid of any emotion. Corporal, the private is correct. This is a scheduled transport. You can verify our appointment with the depot command. She gave him an out. A simple, face-saving way to end the encounter. A professional exit. Davis saw it not as an exit, but as a challenge. The quiet woman was telling him how to do his job. He laughed, a full-throated, arrogant sound this time. Oh, can I, he said, leaning so far into the car that Alara could see the pores on his nose. I think I'll just conduct my inspection first. We have to be thorough. Can't have any security risks slipping through. His eyes raked over Alara again, lingering with casual insolence. He straightened up and tossed the two ID cards onto the dashboard. They skittered across the plastic. Now, out of the vehicle. Both of you. Miller looked like he was about to be sick. This was escalating. He was a passenger in a situation spiraling out of his control. He fumbled with his seatbelt. Alara did not move. Her stillness was absolute. It was not the stillness of fear or indecision. It was the stillness of a predator. Of a rock in a river, letting the current rush past it, unchanging. I said, out of the vehicle, Davis repeated, his voice louder now, laced with frustration. The show was not going as planned. The audience was not responding correctly. Corporal, Alara said, her voice still impossibly calm. I suggest you return to your post and allow us to proceed. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. A final warning. Not loud, not angry, just final. This was the moment he could have walked away. He could have waved them through, made a joke to his friends, and forgotten the whole thing. But his pride, a fragile and bloated thing, was on the line. He had an audience. He had a uniform. He had the power. He chose poorly. You suggest, he barked, a genuine flash of anger in his eyes. You don't suggest anything, you old hag. You do what you're told. He reached into the car, his hand shooting past Alara to grab PFC Miller's arm. Get out. Now, his fingers dug into the private's bicep. Miller cried out, a small, sharp yelp of pain and surprise. And that was the line. It was not the insults. It was not the sneer or the posturing. It was not the abuse of authority. It was the hand on the young, terrified soldier she was responsible for. It was the sound of his pain. Something shifted. It was not a large movement. To an untrained eye, nothing happened at all. But in the space of a single heartbeat, Alara Vance ceased to be a logistics consultant. Her breathing, which had been slow and steady, hitched for a microsecond, a system reset. Her shoulders, which had been relaxed, settled a fraction of an inch, aligning her spine into a perfect column of potential energy. The muscles in her neck, barely visible, corded slightly. Her eyes changed. The calm, observant grayness did not vanish, but it was now overlaid with something else. A focus so absolute, so chillingly precise, it was like the aperture of a camera lens snapping into perfect clarity. The world outside that focus ceased to exist. Corporal Davis, his attention fixed on Miller, felt a sudden pressure on his wrist. It was not a slap. It was not a grab. It was a precise, measured application of force. Ilara's hand had moved from her lap to his wrist in a blur of motion so economical it was almost invisible. Her thumb found the nerve cluster on the inside of his wrist, just below the heel of his palm. Her fingers wrapped around the back, her index finger knuckle pressing firmly against the radial bone. It was a textbook C-clamp grip. A compliance technique. Davis tried to pull his arm back. He could not. It was as if his wrist were locked in a vice made of living steel. "Let go of the private," Ilara said. Her voice was the same. Low. Even. But now it carried a weight that could crack stone. For a moment, pure, stupid shock registered on Davis's face. Then, rage. "You bitch," he snarled, trying to rip his arm away and turning his body to confront her. This was his second mistake. A far more serious one. By turning, he gave her his momentum. By trying to pull away, he gave her his strength. Ilara did not resist his pull. She flowed with it. She used his own furious energy to guide his arm in a tight, controlled arc. His wrist, still locked in her grip, was twisted inward. His elbow, forced into an unnatural angle, hyperextended with a soft, sickening pop. A strangled scream tore from Davis's throat. His body, following the trajectory of his trapped arm, was pulled off balance. He stumbled forward, his face lurching toward the open car window. Ilara's other hand came up. It did not form a fist. Her palm was open, her fingers slightly curved. She met his cheekbone not with a strike, but with a firm, decisive push. It was just enough to redirect his falling momentum away from the car and onto the asphalt. He went down hard. The motion was a symphony of controlled physics. A twist, a pull, a push. It took less than 2 seconds. Corporal Davis lay on the hot blacktop, clutching his arm, his face a mask of agony and disbelief. His elbow was dislocated. The bravado had evaporated, replaced by a raw, animal pain. The 2 other MPs by the shack were frozen. They had watched it happen, but their brains had not yet processed what they had seen. One moment, their friend was in charge, playing his usual power games. The next, he was on the ground, incapacitated by the quiet, middle-aged woman. One of them had his hand halfway to the flap of his holster, but he seemed to have forgotten what to do with it. Ilara released her grip. She pulled her hand back inside the car. She placed it in her lap, in the exact same position it had been before. She looked at PFC Miller. The boy was staring at her, his mouth hanging open, his face utterly devoid of color. The imprint of Davis's fingers was a dark red mark on his arm. "Are you all right, Private?" she asked. Her voice was back to its previous state. Calm. Unconcerned. As if she were asking if he wanted coffee. Miller could only nod, a spastic, jerky motion. The silence that followed was absolute. The cicadas seemed to have stopped. The heat felt colder. Every person at the checkpoint, including the drivers in the 2 cars now waiting behind them, was motionless, locked in a tableau of shared shock. Then, a car door opened. The sound was loud, a sharp click that broke the spell. The man from the blue sedan behind them was getting out. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a ramrod straight posture that no amount of civilian life could ever erase. His white hair was cropped short. He wore a veteran's cap. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward the scene. He did not look at Ilara. He did not look at the whimpering Corporal Davis on the ground. He looked at the 2 frozen MPs. "You two," he said. His voice was a low gravelly rumble, but it carried an authority that Davis's had only imitated. It was the voice of a man who had given commands that sent men into fire, and had been obeyed without question. "Secure your partner. Call the provost marshal. Now. The two MPs flinched as if they had been struck. Years of ingrained training kicked in. They looked at the old man, then at each other, and scrambled into motion, one fumbling for his radio, the other cautiously approaching Davis. The old man then turned his gaze to the car. He looked past the still catatonic Miller and his eyes met Ilara's. He saw her. Not the polo shirt, not the graying hair, not the sensible shoes. He saw the stillness. The control. The lethal economy of movement. He had seen it before. In places the news never reported. In people whose names were never known. He walked to the driver's side window and addressed PFC Miller, though his words were meant for Ilara. "Son," he said, his voice softer now, but still firm. "That woman you are driving is a national asset. The fact that you are still breathing after what just happened is a testament to her restraint." He looked at the red mark on Miller's arm. That corporal put his hands on a soldier under her protection. He is lucky she only dislocated his elbow. He is lucky he's not being medevaced to a morgue. The old man then looked directly at Ilara. He did not smile. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. A sign of profound respect between two people who understood a world that others could not even imagine. "Ma'am," he said, and the word, from his lips, was the highest form of salute. "Command Sergeant Major Wallace. Retired. Apologies for the behavior of these children. They don't know any better." Ilara inclined her head a fraction of an inch. It was the only acknowledgement she gave. Wallace turned his attention back to the MPs, who were now trying to help the sobbing Corporal Davis to his feet. "You," he barked at the one who had hesitated with his weapon. "What's your name?" Specialist Jones, Sergeant Major," the MP stammered, his eyes wide. "Specialist Jones, you and your partner are about to have the worst day of your entire military careers," Wallace stated, not with anger, but with the cold certainty of a weather forecast predicting a hurricane. "You stood by and allowed a non-commissioned officer to assault a fellow soldier and a civilian contractor under his care. You failed to de-escalate. You failed to intervene. You failed at every conceivable level of your duty." Jones paled. He opened his mouth to speak, but Wallace cut him off. "Save it for the captain. He'll be here in 5 minutes." Wallace glanced at the sky. "And if I know anything, the provost marshal himself will be about 30 seconds behind him." As if on cue, the distant sound of a siren began to wail, growing closer with alarming speed. The arrival of authority was swift. A black SUV with official plates screeched to a halt behind Wallace's sedan. A captain, young but with the weary eyes of a company commander, jumped out, followed by a grizzled master sergeant. The captain took in the scene, a corporal on the ground, cradling his arm, 2 shell-shocked specialists, a retired command sergeant major looking thunderous, and a nondescript civilian woman sitting calmly in a car with a terrified-looking private. "CSM Wallace," the captain said, his voice tight with stress. "What in God's name happened here?" Wallace pointed a thumb at Davis. "Your corporal decided to play a stupid game. He found out what happens when you win a stupid prize." Before Wallace could elaborate, another vehicle, a patrol car this time, pulled up. A lieutenant colonel stepped out. He was the provost marshal, the chief of police for the entire installation. His face was a grim mask. "Captain, report," the colonel commanded, his eyes sweeping the scene with a practiced, analytical gaze. The captain began to relay the confused report he was getting from Specialist Jones, but the provost marshal held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes had landed on Ilara. He walked slowly toward her car. Corporal Davis, seeing the senior officers, found a new surge of indignant fury. "Sir! That woman assaulted me. She broke my arm. I was conducting a routine security check and she attacked me. Arrest her." The provost marshal ignored him completely. He stopped at Ilara's window. He looked at her, then at the ID cards still sitting on the dashboard. He seemed to hold his breath for a second. "Ma'am," he said, his voice formal and unexpectedly deferential. "May I see your identification?" Ilara picked up her card and passed it to him. He took it as if it were a delicate artifact. He did not look at the front. He turned it over and scanned the barcode on the back with a handheld device he pulled from his belt. The device beeped once. A screen lit up. The provost marshal stared at the screen. The color drained from his face. He went from grim to ghostly white in the space of a heartbeat. The other officers could not see the screen, but they saw the reaction of their commander. A deep, professional dread began to settle over them. He looked up from the scanner, his eyes locking with Ilara's. The look he gave her was one of profound, almost fearful respect. "Clear this checkpoint," he ordered, his voice suddenly sharp and loud, directed at the captain. "Get these vehicles through. Now." Davis, propped up by Jones, could not believe what he was hearing. "Sir? What about her? She assaulted an MP." The provost marshal finally turned to face Corporal Davis. His expression was one of cold, unadulterated fury. It was the look of a man who had just discovered a live grenade in his own office. "Corporal," the colonel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You are relieved of your duties. Specialist Jones, you will escort him directly to the base stockade. You will not take him to the clinic first. You will not pass go. You will place him in a holding cell. Is that understood?" "But my arm, sir," Davis wailed. "The medics at the stockade can look at it after you are processed," the colonel snapped. "You are lucky you will ever use that arm again. Now get out of my sight." He turned to the other MP. "Specialist, you are confined to barracks pending a full investigation. Captain, I want you and your master sergeant in my office in 1 hour. You will explain to me how your men were so poorly trained, so undisciplined, that this was allowed to happen." The captain and master sergeant stood ramrod straight, their faces grim. Yes, sir, they knew their careers had just taken a severe, possibly fatal, blow. The colonel then walked back to Ilara's window. He handed her ID back with extreme care. "Ma'am, on behalf of my command, and the United States Army, I offer my deepest apologies." He was not just apologizing for the rudeness. He was apologizing for a catastrophic breach in a protocol he had just been made aware of. The scanner in his hand was still glowing faintly. On its screen, unseen by anyone else, were the words. Status, red. Identity verified, Vance, E, clearance, Yankee White/SCI Majestic. Directive, do not detain. Do not impede. Do not question. Render all assistance. Notify JSOC Liaison and SEC, Army, Cipher 7 immediately. Failure to comply is a violation of Title 50. The colonel felt a cold sweat on the back of his neck. Title 50 was not about military justice. It was about war and national defense. It was the legal framework for espionage and covert action. He had no idea what a logistics consultant with that designation was doing on his base, but he knew with absolute certainty that he was standing on the edge of a career-ending, and possibly life-ending, abyss. "Will you be pressing charges, ma'am?" the colonel asked, his voice tight. It was a formality. He was praying she would say no. Ilara looked from the colonel's pale face to the pathetic figure of Corporal Davis being led away, his bravado finally shattered. She then looked at PFC Miller, who was still trying to process the last 10 minutes of his life. "No, Colonel," she said. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "That won't be necessary." She paused for a moment, her gaze distant. The lesson was sufficient. The colonel nodded, immensely relieved. "Understood, ma'am. The barrier is being raised. You are free to proceed." He stepped back and rendered a sharp, perfect salute. It was not directed at the car, or at the uniform of the private. It was directed solely at the unassuming woman in the passenger seat. PFC Miller, his hands shaking, put the car in drive. He navigated slowly past the now empty guard shack and the raised barrier arm. The silence in the car was thick and heavy. They drove for nearly half a mile before Miller found his voice. It came out as a hoarse whisper. "Ma'am, who are you?" Ilara turned her head slightly and looked at him. Her eyes were back to normal. Calm. Gray. Unreadable. The chilling focus was gone, replaced by a quiet neutrality. "I'm a logistics consultant, private," she said, her voice gentle. "And you have an appointment to get to. You're going to be late." It was a dismissal. A quiet closing of a door he was never meant to look through. Miller understood. He swallowed hard, nodded, and focused on the road. He would drive her to the comms workshop. He would not speak of this again. He would carry the memory of those 2 seconds of impossible, terrifying grace for the rest of his life. He would wonder, but he would never, ever ask again. As they drove away, Ilara glanced in the side view mirror. Back at the checkpoint, Command Sergeant Major Wallace stood alone. The MPs and their disgraced corporal were gone. The Provost Marshal and his captain were speeding toward a meeting that would reshape their careers. Wallace was watching their sedan disappear down the road. As the car grew smaller, he slowly raised his hand to the brim of his veteran's cap. He did not salute. He simply gave a slow, respectful touch of the brim. A final, silent acknowledgement. A gesture from one warrior to another, across the vast, invisible distance that separated their worlds. He watched, his posture ramrod straight, until the unassuming gray sedan disappeared completely from view. Then he turned and walked back to his own car, the heavy, humid air of the ordinary world settling back into place, as if nothing had ever disturbed it at all.